Hello! And it was on this day that I finished the book. I was not ready. Oopsie! That I finished the book, Castle of Wizardry, book 4 of the Belgariad. Yay! Warnings ahead of time. First of all, number 1 warning is that I'm back at my parents' house. So my camera's probably gonna go red, and I have this weird setup here. My webcam does not work with my laptop unless I'm in a Zoom Discord call. So I'm literally recording myself in a Discord call. So the quality is not going to be great, and I'm sorry. Not that I need to have great quality, but I'm just saying that this setup is kind of iffy and weird. So if you see my mouse moving around, that is why. And the other warning, since I'm at my parents' house, is that people may come into my room. So if I get interrupted, then I'm sorry. I'm not really going to bother editing it out. I probably could, but just a warning that I may get interrupted a few times. But yeah, so this is actually my third take of this video. The first take, I was ranting a lot, and then, more than usual. And then my second take ended up being like 2 hours long because I couldn't figure out the words for what I wanted to say. We're going with it this time. So I've definitely shortened the amount I want to say. So the non-spoiler section is really just going to be 2 points, and then I'm just going to move on to the spoiler section, which I'll just talk about a bunch of scenes and characters, because I love my characters. I love my characters a lot. So, yep. Non-spoilers. This book is 4 stars. I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. It's not bad. But I give it 4 stars below the previous 2 books. Honestly, I think the biggest reason why is because there were all these slow bits in this book. And it's totally a me thing. I get picky with like certain stereotypes and certain characters. Sinatra. So some bits went really slow for me, and one of my favorite characters was kind of a background character for a lot of it. So, it was just my kind of like preference thing. The beginning felt very slow. It kind of reminded me of book 1. Book 1 has this sort of curious allure to it, so it like reels in your curiosity and makes you want to like keep reading because you're curious, but there isn't much happening plot-wise. It's just all these like tiny little skits happening with the main character because you don't really know what's happening. This book, there's like a bunch of tiny little skits with the main character, but they're all these like tiny things, so there's a lot less journey and more like kingdom politics moments. And not that I don't like politics in books, because I really do. There's some amazing political moments in some other series, but in this one, it sometimes is just slow. Not really. It's not that it's not plot relevant, but it's not kind of pushing that plot, if that makes sense. So, to me, this book was a bit slower in certain parts. But the reason why it's still 4 stars is because there's still some amazing parts that I got really excited at. There's one scene in particular that I got really, really, really excited at. And there's another scene that I'm kind of holding close to my heart a little bit. Not like I did with Codex Alera. There's a scene in that is like so dear to me. But there's a scene in this that probably didn't stand out to other people, but stands out a lot to me. So I'll talk about that in spoilers. But slower, but still there were good parts and good bits. And I still do love this series, and I am really excited to get to the last book, number 5. Soon. So that is my first comment. My second comment is something that I thought about saying about the last book, but the last book I was like, it's not that much of a problem. It really stood out in this book, so I'm going to mention it now. The author's prose kind of interrupts itself sometimes. It might just be part of the writing style of the author, or maybe the author just doesn't want to have to describe certain scenes or create more dialogue, or maybe the author doesn't want to get off track from like what they were writing. But something I've noticed increasing more and more with each book, but this book being like very noticeable, is that the author will interrupt himself in a scene. So he'll maybe have a fight that doesn't even see the fight all the way through. It just kind of is like the fight happens and then Garion sleeps in his tent. Like there's just like massive time skips, kind of like incomplete scenes. If it were a movie, it would be like two characters having a conversation and then cutting in the middle of the conversation to the character laying in bed like, I'm tired, kind of thing. Or just like the end of that section. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm sure that there are authors who do that very well and use it all the time and just prefer writing that way. But for me, it's a little jarring because I'm used to a sort of stream of consciousness kind of narrative in the majority of books I read. So it's a little weird to have all of these scenes just like cutting in the middle of a scene and then time skipping and then time skipping. This is definitely the series I've read that has the most time skipping. Dresden Files does it, but it like slopes down and then cuts off, right? It like, you can tell the scene is like kind of coming to an end and then he cuts it there. In this book, in my opinion, the scene doesn't really come to an end. It's like, you know, it's not the climax of the moment, but it's like the main part of the scene is happening and then it ends right after the main part of the scene. So it stands out to me a lot. Maybe the biggest example is the big scene of the book that I'm like really excited about. It's a very intense moment. The last 4 books have been working up to this moment, and there's all the celebration and excitement in the moment, and then it ends with one character saying a line, and then like it just time skips to the next day. Even though there's so much to unpack in that moment that to me, if I were maybe writing this book, I would keep explaining like what happens after that moment. Like there's those like 5 hours before everyone goes to sleep is like has to be insanely packed with like all this content, and instead the author chose to skip that content. So again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, and I'm sure other people like it, but I don't know, it jarred me a little bit sometimes when it happened. So I just figured I would mention that about this author's prose. Again, it's been increasing more with each book. It wasn't really that noticeable before. It was mainly in this one. To be fair, there is a lot to cover in this book, and passing time is definitely saving pages. So it's a balance. One last thing to note, this might not be a problem for everybody else. Well, first, before I say this, if you read the series, do the audiobook. To just continue the trend here, do the audiobooks. They're really, really good. I'm not typically an audiobook person, even if you've seen me been doing a lot of audiobooks recently. That's mostly because I walk around campus a lot, so I need to do audiobooks when I'm walking around campus. But I seriously mean it with this series. This is my favorite narrator in movie, TV, books, anything I've ever had. He's amazing. He just makes the series just be from another world, and it just adds a whole nother layer. Reading these books physically, I would probably be like half as entertained as I am right now. He's just so good. just with like his pronunciation, and it's not even really his emotions, because a lot of the characters don't have that many emotions in play. It's just the speech, the cadences, and all the tiny details. They're so good. They're just so good. And you get to learn how to pronounce all the crazy names, because there's a lot of names that if you saw it spelled out, you're like, I don't know how to say that. I like Rambaroon, Leldarin. Leldarin was not spelled how I thought it was spelled. I learned today. Garion and the Belgariad. Ah, it's so good. It's so good. Atar. I'm gonna start just listing names, because there's one that you have to say it the way he says it, and I'm trying to remember what it is. Senedra. I don't know. There's just something. There's something about how he does it, and I cannot recommend enough. If you listen to this series, and again, it's still a very nostalgic series, so if you want to like return to your childhood, this is the series to do it. I think the narrator is part of what brings this back to my childhood. It's just, it becomes a storytelling kind of method of reading. Instead of just like rereading a book, it's like I'm being told a story. Because it's like this like third person narrative of the prophecy. It just reminds me of being a kid so much. And again, I cannot recommend it enough. Now, what I was gonna say about the audiobook for Castle of Wizardry, that may not be a problem for everybody, but it occurred to me, so I figured I'd say it, is that the audiobook was glitched. At 92% of my audiobook, the narrator was like, and here is the end of Castle of Wizardry. The next book, Enchanter's Endgame, brings together the series to end the prophecy. I was like, what? What? I was very confused, because there was 8% of the book left. What ended up happening after that little outro where they say the name of the studio and everything is it went back 3 chapters and just started playing 3 chapters ago all the way to the end again. So it played the last 3 chapters twice. It was very weird. I didn't expect to finish this book today. I was expecting to finish it tomorrow, because I still had 2 hours left at 92%, and then end it. I was like, oh, oops. So, whoopsie-doo. Unintentional. I hope I said what today was. If I didn't say what today is December 16th, 2021. Just in case. 9 p.m. I finished this book about 4 to 5 hours ago. And I've been working on Christmas presents, and that's why I haven't done the review. But yeah, so just want to say that my library copy did that. I'm sure that's not typical. I reported it to my library, and they're looking into it, so, there's that. But yeah, that was Castle of Wizardry. Very good book. A little slow, but this series is still just... everything that this series is just... It's just there. I don't know how to convey it or explain it well, but there's just something... there's something about this series that really digs into me and, like, pulls out... Again, I don't know how to word it. It just pulls out my... just a lot of the things I like. It's so good. It's so good. And again, it's one of those things that you can just have on the background while you're doing something. That's the other reason to recommend the audiobook, is you could be doing anything and just have it in the background. I may or may not have once or twice showered listening to the audiobook, because it just works. It just works. So, if you read this series, do the audiobook. It's so good. Just do it. Alright. At that point, I'm going to go into spoilers for specific scenes. I'm not going to talk about too many scenes, unlike last time. Whoops. But get into spoilers for specific scenes. So, still giving you time to leave. It's spoilers time. random dance. I don't know what this dance is. The dance my roommate does when she's bopping. She's the one who says bop. If I ever say bop, it's because my roommate put that in my head. Alright. Spoilers. So, if we're going in chronological order, the beginning of the book was very slow, in part because Mr. Wolf collapsed. Mr. Wolf just flat out, nope. He used up too much of his energy, his sorcery, and it started using his life energy, and he just collapsed. And the reason that made the book slow for me is that Mr. Wolf wasn't there. Mr. Wolf is one of my favorite characters, top two. It's Aunt Paul and Mr. Wolf. I realize I could say Belgarath because we're in the spoiler section, but just out of habit. Aunt Paul, Mr. Wolf. His absence really slowed down the book for me, and I was really missing him, like, after a chapter. But, like, I missed him, like, more and more and more and more as time went on. And I think that's one of the reasons it really slowed it down for me. The other reason was that there were, like, 4 scenes, chapters in a row that were all about teenage dating. Like, all of them. Sinedra, and we met Zubret again, and there was his cousin, which, yes, the two of them weren't talking about that, but the cousin was whining about how Garion can't make someone love her, and just all of that, in my opinion. I'm very critical of those, like, cliche stereotype, like, teenage girls, like, need attention and need to be dating someone in order to be happy with themselves and all of that. I don't like those stereotypes. Some people do, I guess, and it is a very common stereotype, especially in fantasy, I've noticed. I can't tell you of a fantasy series I've read that didn't have that, other than Powder Mage so far. But every other fantasy series I've read thus far has had the, like, teenage romance moment, and always a girl. It's kind of annoying, so that's my opinion of that. And this book, it, like, went down a line of, like, Garion could date this person, or this person, or this person. I'm just like, no. No, stop it. Stop. So, I don't know, it's a cliche. This is an old series. This series was written in, like, the 70s or 80s. I believe this book came out in 85. So, since it's such an old series, it does kind of deserve a little bit of leeway, but I don't know, it's kind of interesting in that regard. Let me make sure I ended that. Yeah. That is the 2 reasons why it's very slow for me. Commenting really quickly on how this series was written in the, like, 80s. It's interesting how the author is fitting in a lot of modern themes with this, like, old storytelling way in the past kind of world, fantasy world. Some of the themes that I've definitely noticed, women equality, that's definitely come up multiple times, and I think I talked about that with, I want to say the second book. The second book, I think, had a scene about that in the, what's the name of the region that worships Balar? Whichever one worships Balar, the wolf people, or the bear people. Those people. Wherever Barak's from. I think that place had a theme about, like, women's equality and how it doesn't exist there and how it needs to exist there. This book had a lot of women's equality. It directly challenged that in this world when Garion made Sinedra his equal when they married. A lot of people were, like, outraged from that because they were, like, conservative towards, like, only men can have political power. Women aren't smart enough to be able to do politics. And then, by the way, when that guy said that, Aunt Paul was like, don't mess with Aunt Paul. I'm just saying that this was, like, a very apparent theme. It's a very modern theme, but it's put in an old-timey book, and I kind of like how apparent it is. The other theme I noticed, and this is a very weird theme to think about, because I don't really know what the author is going for. I probably should know what the author is going for. This is the same situation I had with Fun Home. I read the book Fun Home, but I didn't do a review on it because I didn't know if the author was pro or against with certain things. And so I was like, I shouldn't comment on these themes just in case I'm misinterpreting what the author is going for. This is one of those. But it's very interesting because it is a modern theme. I just don't know what the 80s thought about it. But we're going with it. So there's a comment that Silk makes when he's in his home city in Dresnia, and he's basically saying that the spies these days who graduate from the university suck because they aren't being flogged whenever they fail and stuff. And he said that flogging is a great teaching method, and they're doing worse because they aren't being flogged anymore. So, modern theme is that we're no longer allowed to whip people in school because that's not okay. I very strongly believe that is not okay, but it used to be a thing in the school systems here before I was born. So that is like a modern theme. I'm just confused because Silk is pro it in that scene. He's like, they should flog people. So that's why I'm like, it's kind of weird. The modern theme is that it should be gone, but Silk, the character, is like supporting it. So I was a little confused about that. But again, that's an example of like a modern theme showing up in the book. There's a lot more. Slavery isn't necessarily a modern theme in city society, but there's definitely subsets of slavery in this series that like definitely are like linked in with like company treatment and stuff like that. So in my opinion, I think there's a lot of like subtle links to modern day in the past series. So I think that's interesting. Alright, going back to chronological order. The series was really slow at first for me. Hadar came in, saved the day, that was kind of interesting. Again, Mr. Wolf just noped and they had to speed over to a kingdom very carefully so Mr. Wolf wouldn't die. I can't believe he almost died. That's not okay. That is not okay. You can't kill Mr. Wolf. He's almost died twice now. It's not okay. Anyway, 3 times now. He's almost died 3 times now. My man. You can't do that to my man. They head over to this castle. Aunt Paul just keeps trying to recover him. It's kind of funny that Durnit keeps trying to sew together the sack, but Erend can just keep getting the orb out somehow. I'm pretty sure Erend has powers. Speed theory that Erend is like actually connected to the orb in some way because his eyes, people keep looking into his super blue eyes and like getting like super distracted and led away and like just looks like he's looking to his heart. I feel like Erend maybe has a link indirectly, but has a link to the voice in Garion's head, which also I'm going to refer to that voice as the prophecy. I think the prophecy is embodied by a person. And I think that Erend may be like a direct connection to the prophecy itself. Because he just acts like he can just see things how they are. Just the way that Garion was finally able to see things how they were when he held the orb. In the great tremendous scene when we get there. So, speed theory on that. Continuing chronological order, they do a bunch of kingdom things in this one kingdom. I don't even remember where it was, to be honest. Garion meets his cousin. His cousin has this whole fit about not being able to force someone to love her. I've already stated how I feel about that. But, during that scene, she demands Garion to prove that he can do sorcery. And he gets up a twig and turns the twig into a flower. But it's not your typical looking flower. It's this very unique, kind of weird semi-wilted, loose flower, and they drop it and leave it because she was crying, and they had to go because she was crying. I think her name is Adara, and Gary and go back to the castle. But anyway, there's this flower on the ground, and there's this like background narration. Again, this series is like such a storytelling perspective. There's this background narration like, and the flower sprouted its seeds and began to grow. And it seems like it's implying that there's like a meadow growing there over time that Garion caused. And I'm thinking that like that's like one of the things he's changed about the world. It's like a historical moment. Someone way in the future could go to that spot and see all these unique weird flowers and be like, where'd this come from? And the story behind it is that Garion accidentally made it for his cousin. But I thought that was very interesting because it gives this like Garion affected the world in that moment by making a flower. He like changed the world. The other thing about that scene is that it commented that he used himself to make the flower. Like, he didn't take in from his environment or anything like that, like normal sorcery. He could just do it from himself, the same way that he revived the cult in the last book, I believe. So that is fascinating. I think Garion has more power, more unique power than he should have, and I'm very curious how that works. So, that scene was very notable. Honestly, the next scene notable after that was beginning of part 2. So we jump on over to part 2. The very first scene in part 2 was very, very, very confused, and I had to re-listen to it 4 times to really get what was going on. I'm still a little confused on it, but I think basically everything that happened was a dream. I think. So that scene was a little confusing, but there's this dream sequence. Garion's like reliving these moments from earlier in the series, book 1 and book 2 and book 3. It's all this nostalgia. But it's all these serious moments, and it's a bunch of people asking Garion, are you ready? And Garion doesn't know what to be ready for. It's so exciting. I was very confused. I was like, okay. And then he woke up, and I was like, I guess that was all a dream? So he wakes up, and Aunt Paul is like, go bathe and shave. So Garion goes and finds Silk, and they go down to the bath. And while they're at the bath, there's this scene, Garion's by himself, laying back, and this sunlight just comes like through the ceiling and shines down on him like in a perfect circle. And the voice, the prophecy in Garion's head goes, Hail Belgarion. And Garion goes, thank you. And that's the whole scene. That's it. It like after that it cuts to after they've shaved and everything. I don't know. I really like those like tiny detail moments. That was an example of it just cutting randomly. It said that it was going to show us him shaving, and then it just time skipped to him being dressed and shaved. But yeah, it time skips to another interesting moment. All these people are just dressed really nice, and they're one by one entering the Hall of the Raven King. And all that are left is Aunt Pole, Mr. Wolf, Adand, and Garion. And Aunt Pole and Mr. Wolf are having this like very weird personal discussion where they're like, I'm not going to be able to convey it how I want to, but they're just having this moment where Mr. Wolf is like, this is going to be the most unique day of my life. His 7,000 plus year life. He's like, I've never seen a day like this before. And they're like having this like serious discussion about like how long it's taken them and how meaningful it is to them. And Mr. Wolf asks Aunt Pole, any regrets? And Aunt Pole is like, I am content with how things are. And then they get called to go into the Hall of the Raven King, and as they're going, Garion is like, how will I know to come in? And they're like, you will know. And then they go in, and it's just Aaron and Garion by themselves outside the door. It's kind of like a wedding, where you have to like enter the door one by one. They're outside by themselves, and Garion's just standing there, and then the prophecy as a voice, like above, not just in Garion's head, but just in general, invited them in. And so they go in and they walk down the aisle to the front, and Mr. Wolf does his introduction thing where he's like, reveal the orb, and they reveal the orb, and then he has Garion take the orb, and Garion shockingly grabs it and is like, doesn't get incinerated when he grabs it. And he goes and puts it in the pommel of the sword and holds the sword. As soon as he holds the sword like this over his head, Mr. Wolf is like, oh, hold on. I had it written down and then I deleted it, I think. Hold on. I want to get the quote right. Because it's a really, really good quote. And I need to get it right. Here we go. I think I posted it in Discord because I was excited. I was very excited. Let Aloria rejoice! All hail Belgarion, King of Riva, the Overlord of the West. And again, the audiobook guy is the one who makes it so good. It sounds like the way he narrates that scene, it sounds like it's like echoing inside a citadel. Like, just the way he speaks, it sounds so real. So, again, audiobook. But this is like the moment. Like, from the last few books have all been leading up to this moment. Garion has become the Raven King. Let Aloria rejoice. Like, it's so good. It's such a good moment. That's like the big scene of this book. Like, I was so excited. As soon as I noticed that the sword was on the throne, I was like, I know what's happening. He's gonna become the king. I was like so excited. To be honest, on the cover, you can see him holding the sword with the orb in the pommel, but still, it was so good. I was so excited. That's like one of the best moments for sure. King of Riva and Overlord of the West. He is the Overlord of the West. That is so good. Tasty. This is such a good scene. So, that's like the moment. I was hooked. I started binge listening after that point. Things do slow down. I'm not going to talk about Sinedra there, but a bunch of Sinedra things happen. Like, a bunch of Sinedra things happen. And things keep moving on. Garion starts to deal with politics, and he gets an assassination attempt, and he deals with it himself. And he's showing he's very mature, and he's definitely growing. And eventually, the prophecy comes in and is like, you need to go fight Thorak. Just flat out, like, you need to go fight Thorak. That's kind of a big bad guy. He's kind of a big bad guy. And he's like, okay, so he gets Mr. Wolf. Yes! He gets Mr. Wolf. Silk. Also, yes, I do like Silk. Silk has really grown on me over the series. And himself. And they escape out of the kingdom of Riva. And they go over, make their way towards Drasnia, and start working their way up Drasnia. And meanwhile, Aunt Pole is fucking raging. I vastly underestimated how angry Aunt Pole can get. She freaking demolished her entire room. Everything became rubble. That's a weird word. Rubble. And she was angry. She was so angry. I'm terrified of Aunt Pole, I'll be honest. After that scene, I was like, you do not want to be near this woman. I feel so bad for the king. I don't remember who it was, but there was a king. It might be Rambaroon. Maybe not. There was a king that got called in, and they were like, Baelar, have mercy on me. It's whichever one bows to Baelar. That's the second time I didn't know what the name of that kingdom is. It's so good. It's so good. So, Aunt Pole, very angry. So that's why Mr. Wolf, Silk, and Garion were trying to get the hell out of there as fast as they could. So, they go on their own journey, and it's as soon as they reach this journey, I'm like hooked again. I feel like all the kingdom scenes were getting so slow, but as soon as they were back on the road, I was like, yes. And again, I missed Mr. Wolf the entire book, so having Mr. Wolf in these scenes was very nice. Part of the reason why he didn't show up even after he physically and mentally recovered was because Aunt Paul and Garion were kind of avoiding him because they didn't know if his magic was there. And there's this scene on this journey where they're in the swamps of Drasnia, and Silk is annoyed as hell at his country. He hates the Drasnia swamps. I think they're called the Finns. He hates them so much, and he's like complaining about them. And I just want to say that that is very relatable because I hate the state I was born in so much. I hate everything about it. It's politics, it's people, it's how hot it is, it's so smelly. I hate my state. So, there's that. I can relate to Silk. Anyway, they're in the Finns, and they come across these Finlings, which are freaking adorable. I just want to say, Finlings are so cute. They're so adorable. And kind of zooming through the scene, Mr. Wolf has to, like, give Finling's speech in order to be allowed through. And so Mr. Wolf contacts his master, and he's, like, trying to convince his master to allow him to do this. And Mr. Wolf shows that he can do sorcery, and it's, like, this scary moment, because if he couldn't do sorcery, I was going to be very, very, very sad. Very sad. But he could, and he was, like, fine, and Garion talked to him afterward, and it occurs to Mr. Wolf that that's why Aunt Paul and Garion were, like, so terrified of him for so long. And at that moment, you can tell that he's back to being himself. Like, back to before the fight in the last book. So I was like, yes! Yes! I was like, yes. My man was back. Like, he's such a good character. So I'm so happy that he was, like, back to his normal self. He started joking again. Silk kind of went the opposite. He talked to his mom, I think, and he ended up getting drunk and sobbing in someone's arms. It was kind of sad. I kind of feel really bad for Silk, and I just want to say that he's become such a round character. At first, he was such, like, he's just a spy. He doesn't have much more to his personality. And I remember that being an entire theme in one of the books, was that Silk just doesn't have much to him. But I think he's really grown into a person over the series, and that's why he's grown on me. Especially with him now having, like, all these emotions he's dealing with. So, I do like that a lot. He's definitely grown. And I do like Silk, I'll be honest. Moving on, I guess I have really one last scene to point out, and this last scene is the second scene that I kind of hold a little bit dear to me in a weird way. And that is when Garion was kind of at his all-time low, looking towards the fight with Torak and just not having the motivation. He doesn't believe in himself. He thinks he's just going to get there and die. During that, Mr. Wolf comes up and asks, do you want to talk about it? And Garion instead has Mr. Wolf tell a story, because he knows that Garion feels comfort in having Mr. Wolf storytell. And again, I'm going to say it one last time, the audiobook guy, the narrator, Cameron Byerly, solely made that scene just so, it honestly, I felt what Garion was feeling in that scene, where Garion was, like, just getting pulled into, like, his storytelling, like, the way he speaks it out and flows between the story and how he tells it. It's like there's something peaceful and just, like, it just reels you into the story. Like, there's just something about the way Mr. Wolf story tells that just brings you peace and just reels you into the book. So that entire sequence where he's telling the story of how he met Thorak, how he was a jerk, he called him pretty. I just want to say that. I remember. But how he met Thorak, and how he met his wife and the whole story revealing like about his wife, and then he ended up showing Garion how to become a wolf, and Gary ended up meeting his wife because apparently the wife can come back to the dead. That's a very weird one. I don't know how she can come back from the dead, but whatever. Okay, the book says so. But just that entire storytelling sequence, it was so easy to feel like part of the book. So that was a really good one. Really, really good. And this is why I love Mr. Wolf. I love him so much. Mr. Wolf and Aunt Paul, they're freaking good characters. And I will be very sad if one of them dies in the next book. I am intimidated by the next book. Things are going to go down. It's kind of weird, the timing right now, because they're almost to Torak, and the armies that Sinedra are gathering are almost complete. So we have a lot of hours in the next book for what seems to be very little plot. And the other thing I will note is that there's so many aspects of the prophecy that have not come up yet. Darnik has 2 lives. Key example, or Relg and what's her name? I don't remember her name. Relg and the girl that Relg kept taunting. You know, both of those like story paths haven't really come up yet about the prophecy. And the prophecy, the person earlier was like, you're not really going to know much about that to Garion. So I don't know if we'll see some of those things. And I know that there's like a sequel series and a bunch of side books and a prequel and things like that. So it's possible that they're in there, and it's possible that there's just a lot crammed in the next book. There's really a lot of ways this could go. Very interesting that way. So, So, I don't know. I'm curious. I'm very curious what the next book has for me, and I'm going to start it tonight. Woohoo! I was going to start it earlier, but again, I was wrapping presents, so I didn't. My throat. So, that is that. That's really all I have to say on this book. Again, 4 out of 5. The end really started picking up. You could tell that there were a lot of scenes I was like, with. Again, the Finlings are freaking adorable. So cute. So cute. I don't know. There's a lot of moments. The first 30% though, 30% of the first 30% of the book, I was like, yeah. But it picked up. Eventually picked up. So, that's the good news. And Garion is still growing. One last book. Oh my goodness. I am officially at 24 out of 25 books for the year 2021. I had a 25 book reading goal. So, Enchanter's Endgame, the 5th book of the Belgariad, will probably be my 25th book for the year, completing my challenge. Woohoo! And we'll see if I could get 26 by the end of the year. It might happen, it might not happen, we'll see. Evidently, the next book I'm going to read, let me show the cover for y'all. Usually covers have spoilers, so I probably shouldn't, but I think covers are pretty anyway. They're gorgeous, so. Enchanter's Endgame, if it would focus, please. There we are, Enchanter's Endgame. Very exciting. It says it's 14 hours, unless the same thing that happened in the last book happens. So, 14 hours. It looks like it says Sal Mishrak. Probably Sal Mishrak. I am very excited. So, I really want to know what's with Durnik. I want Durnik to, like, save Aunt Paul's life. I'll be honest, I kind of ship Durnik and Aunt Paul. Just a little bit. I feel like you're supposed to, though. It seems like the author was kind of pushing that. But I want something to happen. Something. Give me more Durnik. We'll see. We'll see in the next book when I get there. After I finish Enchanter's Endgame, that really hurt. I will be book 2 of Powder Mage, because I need to finish Powder Mage. I kind of feel guilty about Powder Mage, so we'll get there. beautiful little maps. So, go on to Powder Mage. After Powder Mage, shrug. I honestly don't have book 3 of Powder Mage with me here. So if I finish that book and there's still like another week or 2 of winter break, I'm gonna have to end up reading whatever I have on the shelf. So, shrug. We'll see. We will see. Or I could get it on library, probably. And then the last thing I always announce is if I bought any new books. Yes, I did. I don't have it with me. It's in the dorm. But I bought Shadows of Self. That was the last book I needed of Era 2 of Mistborn. So now I officially own all of the Cosmere except for Elantris and Rhythm of War. And I don't know if Rhythm of War is selling the small copies yet. I should probably get the big copy anyway because it's freaking gorgeous. It's so beautiful. All those covers are gorgeous. I love them. I get the UK covers, I should say. But I will say the US cover for Rhythm of War is also freaking pretty. I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but you have to admire pretty covers. They're so good. My book collecting addiction has been fueled. Anyway, I did get Shadows Itself, and those are very tiny books, so it's possible I might just speed read Era 2 sometime. Just because Era 2 is, again, just all these little tiny books. So, yeah. That's really all I have. I might do an announcement soon. I don't know, like, people's opinions on things. It's not a book-related announcement, and that's why I'm, like, torn about when I should do it and stuff. But I might do that soon. Just for general knowledge. I could also maybe just update the channel trailer thing. And do it there. I don't know, we'll see. So, that will maybe be coming soon. As well as maybe, I know every time I've said soon, it's been like a month, but maybe soon to a month, I'll be done with Enchanter's Endgame. Alright, that's all I had. Bye-bye.